All right, Amy, you want to start us?
Um, sure. I feel like I'm losing my I'm tired. It's Thursday.
You'll
Like,
find
oh yeah, this is me.
it.
So we the question is up there. How do we question? So we talked about why we question, but then how do we question? So this made me think about the way we ask questions, and Charlene, you saying this is a naive question versus this is a combative question. And sometimes it's hard to know that difference. So um now what do? We've questioned, we're thinking about why we question, maybe we're reflecting, maybe we're trying to understand more, but then how do we do it? Sometimes we don't know how to ask the question that we have. And then now what? We asked this question and now what happens? Where do we go from there?
Amy, you're reminding me of some thinking I did. And it was right at the start of when we all were quarantined back in March. And when I thought we were still going back to school at some point. So about April, it hit me really and I started to have a lot of questions about and a lot of worry about our kids. And what will we do? They're going to be behind. And what if they don't engage? And I had a lot of questions and a lot of worry and a lot of angst. And so that now what do we do? I had to actually like calm down for a minute and actually analyze my own bias in that. Like, what do I think that they're not getting at home with their loving families that they were going to get at school, right? And redefining learning and redefining what it means to quote unquote like be behind. What does that mean even anyways? And what like what was I, what assumptions was I making? And so part of my now what do we do was, well, let's find out. And so I just I connected as much as I could with families within my role. I don't have a classroom, but know some families, so connected with kids and families that way. And then through delivering food on a weekly basis, got to see some families from a distance. But what I saw helped me redefine and rethink about really what is learning and what was being safe at that time, like, and what was successful. And so during that time, I'd say definitely in April and May, I had to really think about what being successful is right now is being happy and healthy and being with people that care about you. And so it took a lot of angst and a lot of questioning, and a lot of worry. And then I had to pause and then ask myself some more questions like, why was I so worried about the academic side? Why didn't I go to the human side first? So that's kind of like a brain dump of where I was back in the spring.
And to build on that, it makes me think about my own kids because I was teaching first grade remotely. Last year, I had a fifth grader and an eighth grader that are also trying to learn remotely and trying to navigate all of that. And my then fifth grader, now sixth grader, just was completely overwhelmed with anxiety trying to do all the stuff he needed to do. And really, as a family, we had to question what is our priority. And his mental health is our priority, his overall health. So really fifth grade, the end of fifth grade, there's important content, but it's not earth shattering. And so we made that decision for him to kind of take a step back, but based on what does he need, what is important right now, what matters the most, and asking those really hard questions. And as a teacher, it's hard for me to say, don't do that assignment or don't worry about that because I want him to do all the things his teacher's asking him to do. But it makes me think about that, Nicole, about priorities and what really is the key issue. And I thought a lot about that also going back to school in August, because I don't know if you all know this, but in Cherry Creek, we started in person with elementary in August and we've been in person since. And so it was hard to know what it was going to be like when we go back and what are the priorities going to be. And I decided early on, my priority is going to be to make the kids feel safe and comfortable at school, and then we'll worry about everything else. So it all came back to that human aspect, and everything else can wait.
That reminds me of Glenn Singleton's compass, Amy, and thinking about priorities and also perspectives that, the way I might question I might immediately jump into, I'm wondering this, so now I'm jumping into acting, where someone else might come in and their questioning leads them into feeling, and somebody else might come in with that very like data quantitative approach. And I've thought a lot about that as we've navigated the last 6 months. I know how I'm coming to the table and how I'm coming in, having questioned a lot of things, but what's on the other side of that? How is the person sitting across from me thinking through this or coming to this conversation, and how does that impact what happens next? Because we're all experiencing, what did somebody say? We're in the same storm, but not the same boat. And so with people having different experiences in this larger global experience, and then just being different people, can really impact a relationship.
That makes me think about what Nicole said about how what she was focusing on the academics at first and not the inside. So when you say different perspectives, sometimes it's even within ourselves, you know, my teacher brain versus my mom brain kind of situation, where you have to kind of dig within yourself to find your own perspective and which piece is important in that moment.
Definitely.
And then, because I know we want to make sure we think about questioning right in a positive, like proactive, like way perhaps, or how could we use it to leverage like some really positive thinking. We saw from remote learning, we saw a tremendous amount of kids participate in different ways, than that surprised us, right? And so the question is, well, one, why did that surprise us? Because it was March and April. Like those are things like we should know our children deeply, right? By that point. So why did it surprise us? And also, what was it that this learning at home provided for kids to make them stay more comfortable? A lot of times we saw kids come out of their shell in different ways, right? Or participate more or speak up more. So I know we can't necessarily replicate everything at school at home, but like the questions could be, what was successful about remote learning? What helped kids? And what could we put in place in our environments? How can we make them feel more comfortable, right? Or how can we give space for them to name what would make them feel more comfortable? That was just some other thinking we did.
Anything else? Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Want to jump in?
Well, I think Amy, Liz, and Nicole, you all three mentioned that feeling of safety and feeling comfortable. And that took me to the study Google did a few years ago. And it was around adults, not kids, but they were looking to create the perfect team, this high-performing team. And so they wanted to examine personality traits and all of these other skills and variables they thought were important. And what it came down to was psychological safety and the skills the team members had to listen to one another, to respect one another. They asked good questions, and they built this circle of trust so that then they could solve better problems and be more effective and more efficient. And safety has come up a couple of times. You led with HBR's idea around trust. So when you can start to create that environment that has a level of safety that we can ask questions, whether it's adult to adult or adult to student or student to student, when those conditions exist, the questions are going to lead to better answers, and we'll be able to tackle more challenging problems. And I'll find a short, like 3-paragraph synopsis of the Google study, and it was called Collaborate or Bust. And they studied team after team for a while. And what they found was your personality traits didn't matter. It's what you brought to the table to listen and trust one another that mattered most.
You're making me think of Donna Hicks' work on dignity
Mm,
and
Mhm.
mm,
how
mhm.
psychological and physical safety are so crucial and a really important part of that process of engaging in a dignified way with somebody else.
Mhm.
I'm going to jump in, and then I'm going to sneak out. I get to go to a meeting that was just called because our board just had a special meeting. So there's going to be a change in the next 5 minutes for my district. So I'm guessing. But I would say listening. Thank you, ladies, for that. Like just listening. I experienced a couple of things that actually evoked some very deep feelings. And so it's, in this questioning notion is like, how do you maintain emotional stay as you are listening for people and listening to understand, right? Because I definitely agree with that notion as well, and not just to respond. And so it makes me think about in questioning, and as a coach of new and aspiring principals, I always want to throw the opposite out to people so that they're looking at things from two or multiple perspectives, right? And so there were two things that came up, and I said, if that same wondering or what have you were to come from specifically a person of color, how would that be perceived? Right. And so it's just really helping for me, the questioning is about how do I help people to have an understanding or some kind of awareness to those different perspectives, because we do have our way, right? We have our one perspective, and it's when we are closed off, and not on purpose, it's just human nature, right? It can get us into trouble, and it wasn't even a part of our heart or our intention, right? We just were not aware. And so in questioning is also, how do you help others to be aware and open to those multiple perspectives?
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Yolanda, what district are you in?
Aurora.
Okay. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I hate that this conflict just happened before we jumped on, but thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes,
Yeah, thank you. Hope your meeting goes well.
me too.
All right. Nicole, are we ready for the next slide?
I think so. Sorry, I was writing some notes and she made me think.
So the next slide is some questions about a little self-reflecting. And so thinking about these questions or any other questions that have popped up for you while we've been chatting right now, just doing a little reflection.
We decided to take some of these. The bulk of them are from this book we referenced. It's Dr. Goldie Muhammad's book called Cultivating Genius. And then we added a couple, like a twist on our own. But and you can take out students if you work with adults, or if you could just put who are your people, or you could change that to fit you. But what we thought was these questions went from kind of a hit, like Liz said, that all the quadrants on, say for example, like the Courageous Conversations Compass, but also like got to a different level of depth. And by no means do we hope that you sit and write your answers to all of these questions down. That's not the intent. Look those over, see if one resonates with you and you want to write that question down or a response to that question. But again, it's just, this page is really for inspiration. So we'll just take a few minutes here.
So our goal for tonight is that we wanted you to really question one of three main topics. And so the three topics are professional identity, relationships, and teaching practices. With our numbers being what they are, I'm going to kind of walk you through the guiding questions for each one of those buckets. And then if we're all kind of feeling like we want to stay in one area, we can just stay in a whole group and skip the breakout groups and have kind of an open conversation. So when we thought about the last 6 months and we thought about some of the questions that we're hearing over and over again, or themes that we're seeing across the teaching practice, one was professional identity. So thinking about, how do I define my role? Why am I in that role, and what impact do I want to have? And how that has been a real journey for people. And there's been a lot of questioning around kind of who are we as educators right now, and going forward. With teaching practices, some of our guiding questions were, what are our beliefs about teaching and learning, and how has that changed in the last 6 months? And then finally, we've heard a lot about relationships with families, relationships with students, relationships with teammates, and how, you know, our circumstances have affected our collaboration. And so wanted to give people a chance to kind of question and push each other's thinking in that area as well. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to kind of look at the guiding questions, think about which one you feel most drawn to, and then go ahead and in a minute, I'll ask you to drop your name in the chat. So take about 30 seconds to see what's resonating with you, and then we'll see what our numbers look like. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to just write professional identity in the chat. If you feel like that's what you want to dive into, go ahead and pop your name in the chat right now. Okay. What about teaching practices? I'm going to write that in here just to separate it for Nicole. Perfect. Thanks, Charlene. Okay, and then my guess is everybody else is looking for relationships. If you're relationships, go ahead and pop your name in the chat. Okay, great. Nicole, since I was originally going to facilitate professional identity, I would love to go in teaching practices, if you wouldn't mind making that switch. And then we're going to break out for about 10 minutes and then come back together and share some of the thinking that came out.
Okay. We'll do this. Sorry, I was writing notes about where to go. Okay, so the first one I'll do is teaching practices, and I have Liz and Charlene. Is there somebody else I'm missing, or are we good?
No.
You were gonna go there too, right?
Yeah.
Minor?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we'll see you.
Amy,
Hi, Roberta. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you as well.
Hi, Amy. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I was glad to have met Ellie recently too. So, all right. The guiding questions there, if that inspires you, are what are your beliefs about your students and families? How have you had to adjust collaboration with colleagues, and what has been that impact? So anybody could start either, responding or just, more questions would be great too, either way.
So I chose this one because I'm working with a team of teachers within a school, and they are all the remote teachers. So they're teaching kids remotely while their colleagues are all welcoming kids into their classroom every day. So this team is wrestling with how they build new relationships with one another in this remote state, as well as how do they stay connected with their colleagues. So what used to be commonplace of sharing stories and with one another is now very different. So my wondering is around as they continue to come together, what might they as a remote team continue to lift up as far as I'm wondering around feelings and connections. And then what might be some blind spots? The question that was their beliefs about families and students. I feel like that might be a blind spot, that they hold these beliefs. They lived through last spring and now they're living something different. So I'm wondering how to lift up their beliefs as both positives and acknowledge them, and then what might be some blind spots for them. So I'm phrasing that in the form of a question that maybe some quick dialogue around.
Yeah, Ellie, you're making me think when you said that about like kind of levels of questions, like a question to start that requires less risk, right? Where we can all enter in. And then as you go, the questions, require a little bit more of you to be vulnerable and trust within that group. And maybe that's a way for them to bond, right? If they're forming these new relationships with each other.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Amy?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering kind of how much interdependence there is on the team, and what are the ways that they're able to share both the things that they're really excited about and that are working for them, and the things that are that they might be struggling with, and like how you were talking about psychological safety earlier, like how safe does it feel to be vulnerable in that way? And I think it's hard because at least in the spring, maybe you had some continuing some existing relationships, but I don't know with this team, is it like, are they a team from before, or are they coming together for the first time virtually? Yeah, so it's one thing to kind of continue online some of those in-person relationships, but what are some of the ways to build that safety among the team when you can't rely on like the interpersonal, just like having lunch together or having a chatting when you're waiting for a meeting to start, or some of those things.
Yeah, I wondered too, and I don't know this to be true, but I wondered how much, is there a pull between this new relationship and bonding and then this other place that they had felt connected to, or colleagues that they had worked with? Like, is there a need to kind of acknowledge that pull there, but the need to strengthen their current team or their current, collaboration?
And so thinking about, Amy, you lifted up successes and struggles. And then Nicole, you are referencing past relationships and new relationships and what might need to be acknowledged as well as nurtured. And those are questions I can't answer. I come in and I'm working with them and then I leave and so I'm coming back to them. That makes me think those might be some questions to pose to the group in a way that feels safe. The group is in the process of developing their own mission and vision statements so that they anchor to something for themselves. The past relationships hasn't come up yet. That makes me think that's worthy of a conversation. As they're moving forward, what are they also perhaps grieving, or where might they feel loss? So thank you for that.
Nicole's noticing made me think about there could be some value in those comparison questions, like how does being a part of this team compare to other collaborative relationships you've had in the past, or even comparing the reality of this fall to what they were expecting when they accepted the position on the team. Like, how does it compare to what you thought you were signing up for? Or...
Yeah, because they'll be 2.5 months into school by the time they come back together. So that's so comparison questions that are neutral in the asking, that there is no good or bad, there just is. I'm wondering, okay. I need to, now you're making me think somewhere. I'm going to have to just think about it a little more.
That's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, it's always going there.
Amy, how about for you? Do you have something you want to pose to us?
Yeah, I think it's similar in that, I guess I'm navigating what is it like to build relationships that start 100% virtually. And because it really felt, I mean, the spring was strange, but if you've like have rapport and you have trust and like, I coach teachers and school leaders. And so like, it seems like, oh, we're just moving this to a different format. And I think now some of the work I'm doing is just kind of starting from the beginning and building all of that without maybe some of the nonverbal, some of them you still have, but it's like just some of the things that maybe I relied on when I'm in person with someone to kind of build that quickly. Just what does it look like to build those relationships when it's totally, we're in two different spaces.
You're making me think about some of the playfulness that happened, right? When we were all kind of locked into our houses. So I know there were the virtual happy hours, right? And you did those with people, right? And then you cared about seeing their faces, right? You get on and you'd be like, it's so good to see your face. And like my kids played with their cousins, like they did, I don't know, some kind of online game, like thing, some game. I don't know. But it was just like a way for them to connect because they couldn't be with them. I'm wondering if there's a place to harness some of the things that did work with the people we liked and as we're getting to know new people, I don't know. It's still not quite the same.
Yeah, and probably, I mean, there is like a level of intimacy and just being in one another's homes or like, so, that might be an opportunity for a connection that you wouldn't have if you just knew somebody only in their workspace and they're like, my kids are passing behind or things like that,
Right.
Yeah.
I noticed recently, I asked a teacher yesterday, actually, I'm like, let me see a picture of your puppy. I haven't seen a picture of your puppy since May. And he's huge now, right? He's not a pup.
Yeah.
He doesn't look like, but she, I was like, I really miss seeing him actually. Every couple of days we would get to see Moose, in these pictures and stuff. And, or see people's homes. And, I don't know, it's just I don't know. I think there's a place that might be able to be leveraged there, right?
Definitely.
Mhm.
And I think I guess one of the things I worry about is there was some novelty in the beginning with being on a Zoom or you're like, oh wow, why don't we do this all the time? Or, and I think there's a lot more now. And so how do you keep it still personal and connected so that it is something fun and it's not, so that you're still tending to all those parts of the relationship that you would if you were in a classroom or sitting next to someone.
So true. So true.
One of the things that comes to mind are the norms of collaboration, the 7 norms. And some of what I've noticed in Zoom calls is some of those typical protocols that we would offer people if we were face to face are abandoned when we get into Zoom calls. And you're right, there is fatigue. And so wondering is how might those norms create some energy, because people might feel more productive or a way to be heard, right? That listening versus speaking. So leveraging those norms might be a way to re-ground a team in some a little bit of structure. When it was chaos, we kind of let that anything goes. And now that we have to get back to business, we do need some of that just to help us feel like that time is productive.
Yeah, and your insight's making me think about how it's harder sometimes to know, because it's harder to know if someone's about to share or if they're done sharing. I don't know, and I had heard, or I'd read earlier on in this spring about how it's a little more tiring because we're trying to pay attention to all of these cues and things, and it's harder to do it on a screen than it is to do it in person. So it's mentally more taxing to do the same amount of time meeting or something like that, because it's just a different level of attentiveness to, so maybe maybe just having norms or even protocols that are really clear for a group, we're gonna all look at this question and pause for 2 minutes, and then if you want to comment, here's the protocol, or we're gonna chat, or we're just gonna go around, or whatever it is. Then maybe it takes away some of that stress of trying to figure out am I supposed to talk, or
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I wish we could keep going, but we've got to come back to group. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so excited.
There was also that that shock of how many families didn't have technology in their homes or didn't have internet access. I think in Cherry Creek School District, we gave out something like 10,000 computers at the first week of remote learning. And so just that realization also, I think it helped us to kind of really understand what was happening with families in our area and what they needed. And it's made us more aware of how we can support them in other ways too. And Nicole's so great at that she does our food pantry and really supports families and reaches out. And so I think that was another aspect that we hadn't even considered.
Sorry, my sidekick is nearing the end. So we were just kind of starting to process through what our group teaching practices are, big themes that were coming out of that, either privately or if there's something, you'd like to share to the whole group. What's resonating with you? What stuck out? What themes emerged from your time in your breakout group?
I guess I will just say, I feel as though it was affirming for me, because I feel as though we're all still trying to figure this out and doing the best we can and trying to be kind to each other and to our parents and to ourselves. And I think that's, I think we just have to keep reminding each other of that, and reminding other teachers and parents and the children, and asking them, how are you and what do you need? Those are those two questions.
I'm taking away from our discussion about how, whether you're teaching virtually now or you're part of a new team or you're building a team virtually, there's still a virtual aspect to a lot of our work, right? Even if we're in a building, right? Fortunate enough to do that, we still don't get to sit and meet together. So we're still doing our meetings, right? Or we're still supposed to be 6 feet apart from people in buildings, right? And all of this, but how much of it is, I don't know, maybe a little more grace, because this is all still really new for us. This, it shouldn't be easy to talk to people over screens, right? There's the human element of that. And so because our group was about relationships, just thinking about what ways can we leverage norms and protocols, or, questionings, or putting things out in space for people to kind of grapple with, like this almost mourning of how it used to be. And then this I don't know, maybe, action towards what it could be now. But just that, it's okay if it's hard.
It's also okay if it's not perfect. I've had to remind myself of that a lot, especially in the classroom. And then also with my own boys, helping them, it's okay if your grades aren't perfect. It's okay if, as long as you're trying and moving forward, then that's what matters.
So we would love to have everyone share kind of what's sticking with you. What are you going to walk away from this evening thinking about? So we're going to do something called the Write and Show. It can be a word, it can be a phrase, it can be a headline. But what would you use to describe our thinking in our conversation tonight? So for example, my word is possibilities. And so take about 30 seconds and write your word, your phrase, your headline, whatever's sticking with you. And then we're all gonna hold them up so we can see one another's thinking.
I'm gonna do it quickly because Rory needs to come.
All right, it looks like everybody's ready. So I'm going to take a picture for the Learning Forward Twitter. Yeah, everybody wants to hold up their sign.
See mine, I wrote it with highlighter.
Ooh. Okay, I'm just sneaking my thing over.
Oh, it's backward. Oh, mine's backwards. Why is mine?
I don't know. Some people's are not.
My screen.
Oh.
Right?
No, yours is good.
Mine's backwards.
I think everybody
my
looks
own
backwards
is
to them.
backward. Okay.
Does your own look backwards to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for sharing. We're going to leave you with a couple of additional resources for tonight. They are in that Google slide that we linked at the very beginning, but they're also going to be on this slide. And I just wanted to give a little shout out about each one. So the big theme of each of these resources is going from obstacles to opportunities. So how can we reframe these obstacles, the stress, the frustration that we're feeling, and turn it into optimism and look for the opportunities or the possibilities that exist from this. So the first one is called Life After COVID. And what this article really talks about is the difference between resilience and post-traumatic growth. That we use that word resilience all of the time in education, but in fact, what we're looking for is growth. And so it's great to bounce back, but we need to bounce back having learned and grown from the experience. The second is Brene Brown. She did a podcast on freaking first times. And so she kind of normalizes some of the discomfort and the frustration that we're feeling with, this is our first pandemic for most of us. And so with that comes some discomfort and some frustration. And so by normalizing it and naming it, we can tame how we're feeling. The next one is crisis-inspired innovation. So this is about times in our history, and it talks most recently about the 2008 recession and some of the innovation that came from that. Zaretta Hammond talks about Apollo 13ing it. So thinking about that scene in the movie where the astronauts are struggling with air or oxygen or something, and the people in Houston say, go get the box. You know, we have to take what they have up there and we have to find a way to get them back safely. And so she really makes a beautiful connection to our families and what do our families already have in the box and how can we capitalize on that? I'm being told to stop talking. And then the last one is freshman year at a distance. So the perspective of a student in Denver Public Schools who got to start her freshman year of high school in a remote setting. But it was actually a really positive thing for her. She felt like she made better connections and didn't feel as lost as she might have going in person. So just some thinking, some food for thought, some additional resources if you're feeling inspired or like you're looking for something to kind of further your thinking.
Thank you, Liz. We're going to save her from that. If you want to, we would love to stay in touch. So here's our emails if you want to take a picture of this screen, or we would love to stay in touch with you if there's some thinking you'd like a partner with again in this. And last but not least, I promised Roberta, and when you make a promise to Roberta, you keep it. So all of our webinars will have a little bit about just becoming a member. Many of you are members. If you're not a member, check out the website. It's $40 a year, which is pretty affordable. And we have a conference coming up in November featuring Doug Reeves. We'd love to have as many people as possible participate there. It's all virtual and lots of hands-on and work. Like he's worked really well with us as far as making sure that it's interactive and not just sit and get all day virtual, because that's really, really difficult. And then the last piece would be webinars. We have space for webinars in November, December, and January. So if you would like to host or co-host a webinar, we'd love to have you. I'm your contact person on that if you want a thinking partner there, and we can always pair you up with somebody too. But we want to keep these going. They've been well received, and we know that even our friends that weren't able to come tonight will watch the recording and look at the resources, and so we count that as a success too for participating. But we're so very thankful for all of your time tonight, and thanks for making us think and helping us question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Bye.
Tell Liz to go be a mom. Go be a mom.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.